delay in starting this webinar. My name is Michel Chiron. I'm with the Swiss Federal Office for the Environment, and I welcome you to today's webinar on the Rotterdam Amendment Proposal. And we will first have opening remarks for this webinar, followed by a video and a presentation on the Rotterdam proposal. And we will then open the floor for your questions and comments. And finally proceed to closing remarks for this event. So thanks very much for being with us, and apologies again for the late start because of the technical issues. It is now my great pleasure to hand over to Mrs. Paula San Miguel, Head of the Environmental Affairs Office of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Colombia, for her remarks. Over to you, Paula. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm glad that you could fix then the technical problems, and now that we can start. And thank you so much again for the invitation to take part of this webinar. So colleagues, thank you so much for joining to this meeting and to this webinar. We are taking now the floor to give some short remarks of introduction. As you know, Colombia recently decided to co-sponsor this proposal, and now we're hoping that many other countries are going to join these efforts also. So first of all, we want to also thank our colleagues from the other countries that are co-sponsors as well, the colleagues from Australia, from Burkina Faso, Switzerland, Mali, Georgia, Ghana, everyone that is already on board, and especially to Australia, Switzerland, and Mali as original proponents of this amend, and to also the Secretariat of the BRS that is giving us huge support right now to have this opportunity to share with all of you our insights. So I'm just going to mention that we have done our research in order to analyze how are we going to stand related to this proposal. And then we found that according to the global chemistry industry, that is this report named Catalyzing Growth and Addressing Our World's Sustainability Challenges in 2019, it says that the chemical industry directly and indirectly generates 120 million jobs worldwide, of which 60 million jobs are spread across goods and services providers in a wide range of industries, from mining to wholesale trade. Additionally, and according to the Chemicals Global Market Report from this year, the global chemicals market will grow and is expected to grow from 4,700 billion that we had in 2022 reported to 5,079 billion this year. So we're having a growth rate from year to year, mostly of approximately 8%. So this shows us that the chemicals market is expected to grow a little bit more than 6,851 billion by 2027 at a growth rate that is going to be permanently around 8%. So these figures actually demonstrate that this industry is acquiring each time and in each year a growing importance, and that we need also to be able to understand and then absorb the importance of also going to these international scenarios with the being conscious of how this is going to affect our position and our industries ahead. So to date, we know that parties have listed 54 chemicals in Annex III of the Rotterdam Convention, demonstrating that this instrument is essential to provide information for the sound management of international trade in certain hazardous chemicals. So we know that despite the fact that the Chemical Review Committee has determined that some chemicals meet the scientific criteria and should therefore be included in Annex III, the Conference of the Parties has not been able, unfortunately, to achieve this objective due to lack of consensus. And this, of course, in our view, is affecting the principle of effectiveness that should guide this instrument. So if the convention is to continue to fulfill its purpose of serving as a tool for sharing information, we think that we should take measures to modernize the convention and to keep it ahead of what is going on in the industry as well. So the rigorous listing process must be preserved, and we defend that, but a definitive solution must be found to the persistent blockade of a limited number of parties that we are experiencing in every meeting. So therefore, the amendment that we will discuss today and that we will be presented for adoption at the next conference of the parties opens the way to keep alive the spirit of this convention. So over 350,000 chemicals are traded internationally. As mentioned, the basis of the convention is the exchange of information that allows decision-making with scientific evidence. An operational Rotterdam Convention, as we want it to be, capable of generating early warnings or alerts on hazardous chemicals, strengthens the position of importing countries, which will be able to decide which chemical imports to accept and under what conditions. So in turn, exporting countries will have to respect those limits. The content of the proposal does not aim to eliminate or limit the process stipulated in Annex III. On the contrary, as we will see, the creation of Annex VIII will provides an additional alternative to include chemicals that parties have failed to list due to lack of consensus, and thus benefit importing parties by giving them greater access to information and to enjoy a strengthened prior informed consent. So Annex III shall continue to be the natural listing mechanism, and this is something that we have been clear about before. But if the parties agree to list chemicals in that annex, there is no need to consider listing them, of course, in Annex VIII. So this is something that is important to have very present in mind. With this amendment, the Chemical Review Committee will continue to exercise the same functions. So there will be no impact on the review of chemicals, nor changes to the system or recommendation to the Conference of the Parties. The fact that parties and other stakeholders make use of scientifically valid sources of information from the 31 scientists who make up the committee is an example of a science-based decision-making process. So it is not therefore an obstacle to trade and should not be used as a reason to block future listings. So with this proposal, rights and obligations contained in the future amended convention will provide parties with more tools to domestically manage hazardous chemicals. So now the import authorization process will require not only the prior informed consent procedure, but an explicit consent from the importing country. So thanks to this, the Rotterdam Convention will regain its importance, its effectiveness, and the high effectiveness that we're expecting. So let us see how this is going to turn over, and let's turn this expectation and this dream into a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paula, for your opening remarks, for providing some figures on the chemicals industry, some information about your region, some examples also, and some rationale for this important proposal. So thanks very much for providing all of this. We would now proceed to the going through the proposal in detail. So I would ask the Secretariat to start with to launch the video. That is a video the co-sponsors have prepared to prepare in a concise way, in a different form, the amendment proposal.
The chemicals industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. There are over 350,000 chemicals circulating in the global economy. The aim of the Rotterdam Convention is to share the responsibility for managing international trade in certain hazardous chemicals. It empowers importing countries to decide whether to accept chemical imports and under what conditions, and requires exporting countries to respect those decisions. The foundation of the Convention is information sharing to enable sound decision-making. The major provisions of the Convention are triggered when a chemical is listed in Annex III. A chemical is listed in Annex III of the Convention when two parties from two different regions have taken action to ban or severely restrict the chemical. The Convention's Chemical Review Committee confirms that the basis for those actions meets the Convention criteria, and the COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex III. This listing process has worked well, but unforeseen circumstances have prevented listing of some chemicals, despite the majority of parties wanting to do so. This undermines the implementation of the Convention and limits the ability of parties to better control imports of hazardous substances. In May 2023, the COP will be asked to consider a proposal to amend the Convention text to create a new annex in which chemicals can be listed if agreement to list them on Annex III cannot be reached. How will the amendments work in practice? The amendments to the Convention text, creating the new Annex VIII and associated obligations, will only apply to those parties that ratify the amended Convention. The process for listing chemicals in Annex III will remain the same for all parties to the Convention. If the COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex III, there is no need to discuss an Annex VIII listing. If the COP cannot agree to list a chemical in Annex III, the parties to the amended Convention can decide to list the chemical in Annex VIII instead. Preferably, this decision will be taken by consensus. But if this isn't possible, it can be taken by a 3/4 majority vote. Parties to the amended Convention will be able to export any Annex VIII chemical to another party only if an import response has been transmitted. So let's recap. Looking at the COP decision process for listings, if the amendments are adopted and once they enter into force. The Chemical Review Committee recommends a chemical for listing in Annex III. The COP agrees to list the chemical in Annex III. All pre-existing processes and obligations for Annex III chemicals apply. Or, the COP cannot agree to list the chemical in Annex III. Parties to the amended Convention agree by consensus or 3/4 majority to list the chemical in Annex VIII. The decision and the decision guidance document are transmitted to all parties. An importing party must provide its import response before any Annex VIII chemical can be exported to them. The chemical remains on the COP agenda for a future decision on listing in Annex III. What are the benefits of the proposed amendment? It provides an additional tool for some countries facing difficulties with managing unwanted shipments of hazardous chemicals. It will help countries to take domestic action to either manage the import of a chemical or not allow the import. It retains the aim of sharing responsibility for sound management of chemicals. It builds on existing Convention processes, which will remain unchanged, including listing chemicals in Annex III by consensus. We hope you can support this proposal, and by doing so, support the continuing success of the Rotterdam Convention.
Thank you very much, Secretariat, for playing this video. I will now take a few minutes to go through the main points of the proposal again with a couple of slides. So, as you all know, the aim of the Rotterdam Convention is to enable countries to make informed decisions through an information sharing process. And the main goal is to share the responsibility for managing the international trade of certain hazardous chemicals. The convention allows parties to decide whether or not to accept certain chemical imports and under what conditions. Exporting countries are required to respect those decisions, and therefore exporting parties must obtain permission from an importing party before they can export any chemical listed in Annex III. This is known, of course, as you know, as the pre-informed consent procedure. The convention does not ban the manufacture, use, or trade of chemicals. Next slide. The major provisions of the conventions are triggered when a chemical is listed in Annex III. To this end, there is a clearly defined process with several steps. And at the end of this process, it is the COP who decides whether to include the chemical in Annex III. And that decision is based on the work of the Chemical Review Committee, the CRC. The COP decision is based on the assessment and recommendation of the CRC. Next slide. So what is the issue that the proposal wants to tackle? The convention has worked well in many cases. We've heard in the opening remarks of Paula that there are 54 chemicals currently listed in Annex III. But we all know that the COP has not been able to list some of the chemicals that the CRC has recommended for listing, because the CRC has found that they meet all the listing criteria. So it means that although the overwhelming majority of the Rotterdam parties want to list those chemicals in Annex III, that is not possible, and therefore the parties wanted to protect themselves to not obtain all the information to base their decisions on. And this situation we know has been going on for quite some time now. The level of frustration is very high, and the parties have gone through 2 intersessional processes that have not yielded the solution to this blockage. And this is why a group of countries from the different UN regions now propose to amend the convention and make a step forward. Next slide. So what is the proposal? The proposal is to create a new annex to the convention, Annex VIII. And if the COP cannot agree to list the chemical in Annex III, then parties to the amended convention may propose listing this chemical in Annex VIII. Amendments to Articles 7, 10, 11, and 22 will establish the process for listing a chemical in this new annex. And this new annex is a means for importing parties to benefit from the PIC procedure and from the information provided in the decision guidance document pending consideration of a chemical's listing in Annex III. So it is an additional tool that can be used in the meantime as long as the chemical is not yet listed in Annex III. The aim remains, however, to list the chemical in Annex III. If the COP decides to adopt this proposal, then the parties to the Rotterdam Convention will have the opportunity to ratify this amendment. Next slide. And how will the proposed Annex VIII work? So the process for listing chemicals under Annex III will remain exactly the same for all parties to the convention. And if the COP decides to list chemical in Annex III, so following the recommendation of the CRC, then there is no need to discuss anything about Annex VIII. It is when the COP cannot agree to list the chemical in Annex III, then the parties to the amended convention can consider the listing in Annex VIII. And this listing decision for Annex VIII is ideally decision taken by consensus. However, if consensus cannot be reached, then this decision can also be taken by a 3/4 majority vote. And once the chemical is listed in Annex VIII, all parties to this amended convention will be bound by the obligations relating to Annex VIII. So that is under Articles 10 and 11. And the chemical can therefore not be exported without the explicit PIC, prior informed consent, from the importing party. The chemicals that are listed in Annex VIII will still be considered for listing in Annex III, and they remain before the COP for a future decision on listing in Annex III. So it's not because they are in Annex VIII that they cannot go to Annex III. So they are still up for listing in Annex III. There's also no change in the procedure for chemicals already listed in Annex III. And the proposed amendments also do not affect the work of the CRC. So the review and recommendation to the COP, that is not affected by this proposal. Next slide. So the benefits of this proposed amendment. The Rotterdam Convention provides an early warning system for countries to help protect themselves against certain hazardous chemicals moving in international trade. And the proposal wants to extend this system. It will help countries facing difficulties with managing unwanted shipments of hazardous chemicals. It will help countries to take domestic action to manage hazardous chemicals, and in particular to help countries whether to allow the import of a chemical or not to allow the import. And it retains the aim of the Convention of sharing the responsibility for the sound management of chemicals. And very importantly, it builds on the existing convention processes and leaves those processes unchanged, including the process for listing chemicals in Annex III by consensus. This all remains in place and unchanged. You will find all the information about the proposal on the BRS website, including also the additional materials like the video and the brochure and so on in different languages. And of course, the proposal that you find on the website does include all the textual changes in detail for you to consider. So that was going through the proposal, and unless the colleagues from Colombia would like the floor, I would suggest that we open the floor for any questions or comments that any of the participants may have, and we will be happy to clarify as much as possible any questions you may have. Thank you. Perhaps the secretary can help me and flag to me if they see any hands raised.
Sure, I can see
For
that.
now, I see.
Yeah.
Yes, I see some hands. I see it now. So I don't see the order, but I see that there's a question from Oscar Gonzalez.
Thank you very much for this explanation about this proposal. I would like to ask how this would work between parties that ratified then this amendment and parties that not yet ratified this amendment. How this would work, and then the parties which not ratified this amendment when export substances of this Annex VIII do not have the obligation of follow the PIC procedure, or they still have the obligation to follow the PIC procedure because the importing country ratifies or has ratified the amendment of Annex VIII. How would work between ratifying and non-ratifying parties? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Secretariat, further back in the slide deck, there is a slide with a table that will help us to look at this question. Exactly. Thank you very much for showing that slide. So here you have the different possible cases, no? Because you could, if I understood your question correctly, it is about these different situations we could be in when a country has ratified the convention, the amendment, sorry, and another country has also ratified or has not ratified, and so there are different combinations, no? So we can have a look at this. You see on the top is the importing party. Let's say the importing party has ratified this amendment, and then you see on the left, the exporting party has also ratified this amendment. Then the PIC procedure is implemented and chemicals can be traded if the importing party consents. So that is quite the clear scenario, no? Where the PIC applies. If we go one over to the right, and the importing party has not ratified the new annex, but the exporter has ratified the annex, then the exporting party can export in accordance with Article 11, providing it has received explicit consent from the importing non-party. So again, it relates in all cases to Articles 10 and 11. If we go down and the importing party has ratified the amendment, but the exporting party has not ratified, then the exporting party is not bound by the obligations in Article 11. And so it means that for the information is available through the decision guided document and enables the importing party to assess potential risks and takes action to manage import through national actions, so frameworks and policies. So the importing party has a plus with regards to the situation where the chemical is not listed. So it helps the importing party to get more information to help with the management of the chemical. The exporting party, however, if it has not ratified the amendments, then it is not bound by the Article 11. And of course, in the last case where both have not ratified, then Articles 10 and 11 do not apply to the trade, to the international trade of the chemical. The PIC procedure does not apply. So those are the different scenarios. And I hope that helps to clarify that question. So I see a hand raised by Mara. Hi, Mara.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Michel. I hope you hear me well. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, of course, to the proponents and the Secretariat for organizing this session. So that's really helpful. I understand that the requirements applying to chemicals listed in Annex 8 and 3 are different. So to avoid any confusion and difficulties in the implementation then the various requirements. I'm wondering whether there is a system foreseen to remove chemicals from Annex VIII in case the COP decides later on the listing of this chemical in Annex III. So yeah, just to be sure that we don't hand the process with a same chemical listed in both annex, because I think that could make the implementation then of the various requirements a bit complicated. So just to have your view on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So actually, the thinking behind this additional annex was really to leave Annex III and its procedures in place and not altering those. And the proponents thought that precisely it is much clearer for implementation if it's a separate annex instead of altering the existing procedures. So it's also not a parallel process. No, if a chemical can be listed in Annex III, then it does not go to 8. But now you're referring to the situation where it goes to 8 because it cannot be listed in 3. And then it's, let's say it gets listed in Annex 8. And for the parties to the amendment, then they will implement nationally, take some action to implement because of that listing. If then later on the chemical gets listed in Annex III, then the Annex III listing prevails over the Annex VIII. Parties to the amendment will already have implemented nationally their, have done their implementation work and their homework, and they will be all set already. That's also why it will not be taken off Annex VIII. It will just remain there, but the listing on Annex III will prevail. We have the amendment wording that does imply that understanding that Annex III prevails over Annex VIII is the reference as soon as it's listed in Annex III. That is the reference. So I hope that helps with your questions. Otherwise, feel free to come back. And I'm also looking for other hands in the meantime. I don't see any just now. Secretary, can you let me know if there is anything in the chat, perhaps? Colleagues, you can also use the chat if you want to type a comment or questions.
Actually, one participant just raised his hand. It is Francisco.
Yes, please, Francisco, you have the floor. Thanks, Secretariat.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and thank you very much for the presentation and all the useful information regarding this amendment. I just have one quick answer, just to be clear, because I thought you already said it in your presentation, but just like I said, just to be clear, this process would not apply to products already worked on the past COPs, or is it like this? For example, in the last couple of COPs, some substances were treated as like fenthion, paraquat, carbosulfan, and so on. And this would not apply to these old substances, or would it?
Thank you for the question. So once the Chemical Review Committee has recommended the substance to the COP for listing in Annex III, that always comes back at each of the COP. It remains on the agenda, and independently of the amendment now. So if there's the examples you have mentioned, they have been, on the COP agenda for many years now. Each time they're back on the agenda because there was not yet the COP decision to list them in Annex III. And that will continue to be the same. So first, those chemicals are up at the COP for a decision to list them in Annex 3. If they are not listed, then they can be listed in Annex 8. Even if they are listed in Annex 8, they remain on the COP agenda to be listed in Annex 3. So there's actually no change with regard to that existing way of handling the chemicals that are recommended for listing in Annex 3 by the CRC.
Thank you very much. Understood.
And there was a question in the chat about the video in different languages in the Spanish version. And the answer is that there is a link now posted in the chat where you can find the video and the brochure in Spanish also. So we encourage you to have a look at that material. Checking again for raised hands. Not seeing any, but giving some time. Feel free to come in with your comment or your questions. Also, the colleagues that have taken the floor, if they would like to come back, that is, of course, also fine and appreciated.
Yes, Michelle. Mara has raised her hand, and after we have Maru from Mexico. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for letting me know. So please go ahead in that order. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for the presentation, Michelle. I simply wanted to express that for Mexico, this is a quite feasible possibility to ensure the effectiveness of the Rotterdam Convention. We are very grateful for the materials you have provided and for having cleared up some of the doubts that our authorities in the capital should have. We think this is important to clarify that this amendment does not prohibit international trade and does not affect the work of the CRC and does not prevent products from going to Annex 3. These are some of the doubts we had, and thank you for the clarification. So I just want to leave these comments, and we keep reviewing in Mexico. I think in first instance, we see this as, I said before, as a feasible possibility to ensure this effectiveness of the Rotterdam Convention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maru, for those comments. Much appreciated. And we understand that you're still in these discussions internally, also on looking closely at the proposal. Please get in touch with us, any of the co-sponsors, should you have any questions you would like to discuss. I would like to turn the floor to Mara from Belgium. And apologies, I was mixed up with who was going to take the floor first, but Mara, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Michelle, and don't worry. Yes, indeed, I have an additional question. If the Annex VIII is adopted by COP11, Do you know, or do you have an idea when we could expect the listing of the first chemicals for which the consensus were not reached? So is it something that we could expect already at COP12 or maybe later on? Just to have your feeling on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Mara. Angela, did you want to take the floor on this question for the response?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the question. And apologies because my camera is not working, but I will try after this. And thanks for the question. Just let me say that just to clarify that the amendment would only enter into force following ratification parties who had ratified. This will be probably take some time, but just to clarify that we cannot say that the new substances will be listed in this conference of the parties. So first we need to adopt the amendment, then we need to wait for the ratification, but it could be through a voting process of if it is necessary, if we cannot reach consensus, but we need to comply with the number of ratifications that are required for the entry into force. So it can take some time, can take 2 years, 3 years in terms of the ratification, and then after the entry into force of the amendment, we can start listing. So I cannot say at this point that we can list, next year. This is my answer, but perhaps Michel, if you would like to complement. But I think that I answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, for answering the question. There was a hiccup, at least for me, and your answer went off just for a little bit. I believe you said that the amendment has to be ratified by a certain number of parties. Did you want to come back to clarify, because your connection was lost there for just a few seconds?
Thank you. Apologies for that. Just to say that the amendment would only enter into force following the ratification by 3/4 of parties, which means that we need, it's gonna take some time or some years, the ratification. So we cannot say that we can list substances after the adoption of the amendment. If we decide to adopt the amendment in the next conference of the parties, of course, we open the process for the ratification. So it's gonna take some time, and it could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And after the entry into force of the amendment, when we reach, the number of ratifications, we can start listing. So I cannot say that we can start, in 2 years or in 3 years, but at least we can send the signal that we are open to find another way to list substances. I hope that it clarifies.
We heard you loud and clearly now. It was that part that we did not hear before. 3/4 of the parties that need to ratify for entry into force of the amendment. So thanks very much for that complete answer. I think that answers the question of Mara.
If I may, Michel, there are 2 questions in the chat from Arnett Kirk asking if accepted by the COP, when would the amendment enter into force?
Yes, so thanks for that question. That was the question that we have just had from Mara from Belgium, and Angela responded to that there needs to be first adoption of the amendment proposal at the COP, and once adopted, the parties of the Rotterdam Convention can ratify the amendment, and then there's a threshold of ratification that needs to be met so that the amendment enters into force. That's 3/4 of the Rotterdam parties, and therefore it cannot be said at this stage when exactly it will enter into force. It will require some time. That was the explanation given by Angela just now. Perhaps you can also let us know about the other question in the chat.
And there is one more question from Francisco, just a couple minutes ago, asking, can you specify the procedural difference between the previous informed consent in Annex 3 and the explicit consent in Annex 8?
Apologies, can you repeat it for me again?
So from Francisco asking, can you specify the procedural difference between the previous informed consent in Annex 3 and the explicit consent in Annex 8?
Yes. Thank you very much for the question, Francisco. So the difference is that the importing party to the amended convention must provide the explicit consent for the import of a chemical listed in Annex 8 before the exporters can export. And this consent can be provided either by a general import response or by a specific communication between designated national authorities. And the current Article 11 includes situations where the exporting party can export in the absence of explicit consent from the importing party. So the Annex 3, of course, remains in place with the PIC procedure, and Annex 8 will have the explicit PIC procedure. So, which is that is the major difference. The explicit PIC procedure is a bit stronger, and that's also because in a way that generates a bit an incentive for listing in Annex 3, which also in the view of the proponents is the core tool of the Rotterdam Convention, and the ultimate aim is to have listings in Annex 3. So that is unchanged, and that is where CRC recommended chemicals should eventually go. So many thanks for that question, and I'm checking again for hands. Don't see any, and no additional questions in the chat, I believe. So just pausing once more to see if colleagues still would like to intervene and ask some questions. It's a good opportunity now, of course. It does not seem to be the case, or do you see any hands or comments in the chat, Secretariat?
No, I see none.
Okay. Thank you for this. So I suggest then that we would go to the last part of this webinar, which is the closing part. Before I hand over the floor, I just want to say from my side, big thanks to everyone attending this webinar for the opportunity to explain the proposal to you, and for your time and very good questions and supporting comments. Of course, we hope from the side of Switzerland that you will support this proposal at the COP. Feel also free to reach out to us now in this period between now and the COP with questions and comments. Of course, feel free to reach out if you would like to co-sponsor this proposal, You have on the different materials, the brochure and so on, email addresses from the co-sponsors, so please get in touch. And of course, we're looking forward to working with you and meeting you in Geneva in view of adopting this important step forward for the Rotterdam Convention. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for the technical support for this webinar and the other webinars that we have had. This is very much appreciated. And it is now my pleasure to hand over the floor to Mrs. Angela Rivera, advisor to the International Affairs Office of the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. You have heard Angela intervene in this question and answer session, and it's now my pleasure to hand over to you, Angela, for the closing remarks. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Michel, and thank you, Secretary, and those who are attending this webinar. Let me express my appreciation to all of you for attending this meeting, and of course for sharing your views and your support to this proposal. Just let me be brief, because I think most of the things were expressed by my Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but just to say that this amendment is supported by a group of countries. We have proposed amendment to the Rotterdam Convention to address the problem that the COP has not been able to agree the list in Annex VIII, particularly 5 substances, despite being recognized by the Chemical Review Committee as meeting the criteria for inclusion, because of sustained opposition from a very small number of parties, preventing a consensus. Just let me say that I think most of you share with me the frustration in terms of attending these meetings. I've been negotiating since 10 years this treaty, and I think it's frustrating that you spend too much time discussing a substance every COP without reaching consensus and listing the substance. The amendments will establish a new listing procedure if the COP and if the COP is unable to agree to list a substance proposed for listing in Annex III. And the COP will be able to list that substance in a new annex, as was mentioned by Michel, Annex VIII, by a majority vote. And as was mentioned by my Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the same rights and obligations will apply in relation to substances listed in the new annex, with one main difference, which is a slightly more ambitious prior informed consent procedure that could only take place following explicit consent from the importing country. The amendment addressed the concern that a very small number of parties have the power to prevent progress, which means that importing countries, many of whom lack the capacity to manage these hazardous substances safely, and may face uncontrolled trade with the consequent risk to human health and environment. It also undermines the reputation of the convention if commercial interests can block action so easily. The amendments will allow those parties who wish to make progress and to ensure that trade in these hazardous substances can be regulated internationally to do so. As I mentioned before, the amendment would only enter into force following the ratification by 3/4 of parties. And this will probably take some time, some years, but I think that if we get your support, we can achieve this amendment and, of course, avoid still undermining the convention. And the analysis has shown us that only an amendment to articles of the convention would address the problem. Amendments to the article require ratification for entry into force, but we need to take the first step, which is to adopt these amendments in the next conference of the parties. The proposal has been notified to all parties 6 months in advance, as is required by the convention. And I have to say that we appreciate the comments made by you in writing in terms of supporting this proposal. And just to say and reiterate the comment made by Michel, in the sense that it is still open for parties to add their names as co-sponsors to the amendment, or to indicate your support in general terms. I think we should work together, we can build together, and we need to strengthen this convention, and we are trying to do our best. And we did it in the previous COP when we reached an agreement in terms of having the compliance mechanism. We spent 15 years negotiating the compliance, but we did it with your support. Just let me say that, and I look forward that you can join us in this process. And just let me express in Spanish, because I think I have some colleagues and I just want to have the opportunity to engage them and have them on board, but just let me be brief. Colegas, solo decirles que hace más de 10 años estamos negociando estos temas de químicos. Y creo que ustedes comparten la frustración de atender unas conferencias de las partes en donde no hemos podido listar sustancias. Creo que esta enmienda es una oportunidad para permitir a nuestros países ejercer el control sobre sustancias que son peligrosas y donde, por supuesto, tenemos la poca capacidad de manejarlas. Es preocupante que un número limitado de partes bloqueen las negociaciones y que no podamos seguir avanzando en este proceso de listar, a pesar de que el convenio no es prohibitivo. Reitero, como lo dije en mi explicación, para que esta enmienda pueda entrar en vigor se requiere la ratificación de 3/4 partes, lo cual va a tomar un tiempo, pero creo que si lo hicimos con el mecanismo de cumplimiento del tratado, en donde duramos más de 15 años negociando y que fue bloqueado por un número pequeño de partes, yo creo que lo podemos lograr. Agradezco a todos los que se han unido en expresar su apoyo a esta propuesta y quiero pues manifestarles en nombre del grupo de copatrocinadores y aquellos que hemos hecho esta labor, que esta es la única opción que tenemos después de haber hecho muchos análisis jurídicos sobre cómo lidiar con esta enmienda. Si lo logramos con el mecanismo de cumplimiento, yo creo que podemos fortalecer este tratado. Los invitamos a unirse y a ser copatrocinadores de esta propuesta y a lograr un consenso en la próxima conferencia de las partes para poder avanzar en esta negociación y, por supuesto, seguir construyendo juntos un futuro en la lucha contra estos químicos que son peligrosos para la salud humana y el medio ambiente. Muchas gracias a la Secretaría y a los demás copatrocinadores que están apoyando esta propuesta. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for those who share their views on this proposal. We look forward to continue working with all of you, and I hope that you join us in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela, for those closing remarks. You also mentioned the group of co-sponsors growing. I can inform, it's a pleasure to inform that just today, Peru has confirmed to join the group of co-sponsors. So the proposal is now being presented by Australia, Mali, Ghana, Burkina Faso, the Maldives, Georgia, Colombia, Nigeria, Peru, Switzerland, and Togo. And as Angela said, this group is open and it can further grow up to the COP. So thank you again, Angela, for the excellent closing remarks. And thank you, colleagues, for joining today. This session is now closed. Thank you.